They laughed when the judge said it. Not loud, not openly, but the kind of laugh people make when they already think they know the ending. A single dad in a wrinkled jacket standing alone at the defense table claiming he spoke 15 languages. Someone whispered, "Sure." Someone else shook their head. Even the judge smiled, tired and amused, and said the words that changed everything. "You're lying." The room relaxed, certain they were about to watch another small man crumble. They had no idea they were about to be proven wrong. Before the story goes any further, take a second. If you're watching this late at night or early in the morning, tap like so I know you're here with me. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. If stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe. Now let's go back to that courtroom. The man's name was Daniel Mercer. He was 38, with tired eyes and the posture of someone who carried more weight than he showed. He stood quietly, hands folded, listening as the judge leaned back in his chair. Daniel wasn't nervous. He looked focused, like someone waiting for the right moment to speak. Daniel hadn't planned to be in court that day. He'd taken the morning off work because his daughter, Emily, had a school presentation. She was 9 and terrified of public speaking. He'd promised to sit in the front row and smile the whole time, but life had other plans. A mix-up at his job, a contract written in legal language no one bothered to explain, and suddenly he was here, defending himself without a lawyer he couldn't afford. The case was simple on paper. A translation error had caused a major delay on an international project. The company blamed Daniel, said he'd misrepresented his qualifications, said he lied about his language skills. The penalty was severe. If the judge ruled against him, Daniel would lose his job, his license, and likely his apartment. He would lose stability, and Emily would feel it first. The prosecutor had already spoken, confident, polished. He painted Daniel as careless at best, dishonest at worst. He claimed fluency in 15 languages, the man said, pacing. That's not just unlikely, it's impossible. This isn't a movie. A few people smiled. The judge nodded. Then he looked at Daniel. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "do you understand why this is hard to believe?" Daniel did understand. He'd understood his whole life. People looked at him and saw limits. They always had. He didn't look impressive. He didn't sound impressive. He didn't come from money or connections. He came from necessity. "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel said calmly. The judge raised an eyebrow. "And you still insist your statement is true?" "Yes." That's when the judge laughed, not cruelly, almost kindly. "You're lying," he said, shaking his head. "Or at the very least, you're exaggerating." Daniel didn't react. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just took a breath and said, "May I speak?" The judge gestured, briefly. Daniel nodded. "I grew up in foster care, 8 homes before I was 16. In 3 of them, English wasn't the first language. I learned to listen before I learned to speak. Later, when my wife was alive, we worked overseas, aid work, refugee centers. I translated because it was needed, not because it was impressive." The room grew quieter, not convinced, but listening. Daniel continued, "After she passed, I came back here with my daughter. I took whatever work I could. Translation paid better than most. I never thought I'd have to prove something like this in court." The prosecutor scoffed. "Nice story." Daniel turned toward him. "Which language would you like me to start with?" The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Mercer, this isn't a performance." Daniel met his eyes. "I know." There was a pause. Then the judge sighed. "Fine, Spanish." Daniel switched instantly. Smooth, clear, formal. Not textbook, lived in. The prosecutor frowned. "French." Again, no hesitation. "German." "Arabic." "Mandarin." Each time Daniel responded. Each time the confidence in the room cracked a little more. A clerk stopped typing. A woman in the gallery covered her mouth. "Russian," the judge said quietly. Daniel answered. Silence fell like weight. Not disbelief anymore, something closer to awe. The judge cleared his throat. "That's enough." Daniel stopped, hands at his sides, breathing steady. His heart was racing now, but his face stayed calm. He thought of Emily, of her small hands gripping his sleeve that morning. The judge looked down at the file, then back up at Daniel. The smile was gone, replaced with something else. Respect, maybe, or regret. "Mr. Mercer," he said slowly, "why didn't you explain this earlier?" Daniel answered softly, "No one ever asked." The ruling came minutes later, in Daniel's favor. The company was reprimanded, the charges dismissed, apologies were mumbled. The room emptied quickly, people eager to escape the discomfort of having been wrong. Daniel stepped outside into the sunlight, phone buzzing in his pocket. A text from Emily's teacher. The presentation was about to start. He ran. He made it just in time, slipping into the back of the classroom as Emily stood at the front, shaking but brave. She scanned the room, found his eyes, and smiled. That smile mattered more than any courtroom ever could. Daniel sat in the small plastic chair outside the classroom, his chest still tight from running. The hallway smelled like pencil shavings and floor cleaner. Parents whispered to each other, phones in hand, half listening, half scrolling. None of them knew where he'd just been. None of them knew how close his life had come to falling apart an hour earlier. Daniel leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and let his breathing slow. He reminded himself where he was now. He was here. That was what mattered. Emily stood at the front of the room, clutching a stack of index cards with both hands. Her voice wobbled at first, then steadied when she spotted him. Daniel smiled. Not a big smile, just enough. The kind that said, "I'm right here." She took a breath and began again, talking about her favorite book, about a girl who learned to speak up when no one listened. Daniel swallowed hard. Life had a strange sense of timing. After the presentation, Emily ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You came," she said, like it had been in doubt. "I promised," Daniel said, and he meant more than just today. They walked home together, the late afternoon sun low and warm. Emily chattered about her classmates, about how Mrs. Klein smiled at her, about how she only forgot one line. Daniel listened, really listened, the way he always tried to. When they reached their apartment building, the same cracked steps and peeling paint greeted them. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. That evening, after homework and dinner, Daniel sat at the small kitchen table with a stack of papers spread in front of him. Court documents, company emails, notices he'd been too afraid to open before. Emily colored nearby, humming softly. Daniel realized how close he'd come to losing this quiet, ordinary moment. It scared him more than the courtroom ever had. The next morning, his phone rang at 6:30. Unknown number. Daniel hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Mercer," a woman said, professional, careful. "This is Linda Cho from Global Bridge Solutions. We'd like to discuss an opportunity." Daniel almost laughed. 24 hours ago, no one wanted his name attached to anything. Now they were calling before sunrise. He asked her to email the details and hung up, heart racing. More calls followed. Firms, agencies, universities. Word had spread faster than he expected. By noon, Daniel understood something important. They hadn't suddenly discovered his talent. It had always been there. They'd just never bothered to look. That afternoon, he met with his supervisor from the old company. The man avoided eye contact, apologized without really apologizing, said mistakes were made, offered reinstatement. Daniel listened politely, then declined. Not out of anger, out of clarity. He knew his worth now, and he wasn't going back to a place that only saw him when it needed a scapegoat. Life didn't magically become easy. Rent was still due. Groceries still cost too much. Emily still needed new shoes faster than he could keep up. But something had shifted inside Daniel. He walked differently, spoke differently, not louder, just firmer. Weeks passed. Daniel took a contract with an international nonprofit, translating in crisis zones remotely. The pay was steady, the work mattered.
Emily started asking questions about the world, about why people spoke different languages, about how words could mean safety or danger depending on who heard them. Daniel answered honestly, always honestly. One evening, while helping Emily practice spelling, she looked up at him. "Dad," she said, "are you smart?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because some kids say you have to be smart to be important." Daniel thought about the judge's laugh, about the silence that followed, about the way people changed when they realized they were wrong. He thought about all the times he'd been overlooked. "Being smart helps," he said slowly, "but being kind matters more, and being honest, and doing the right thing even when it's hard." Emily nodded, satisfied. "You're important, I think," she said, then went back to her work. Daniel smiled, blinking hard. Months later, he received an invitation, a language symposium. Judges, professors, experts. They wanted him to speak about lived fluency, about learning languages through survival instead of classrooms. Daniel almost said no. He hated stages, hated attention. But then he remembered Emily standing at the front of her class, shaking but brave. He accepted. The day of the event, Daniel stood backstage, palms sweating. He almost laughed at the irony. He'd faced a courtroom without fear, but this felt harder. When his name was called, he stepped into the light. He didn't talk about 15 languages at first. He talked about listening, about being invisible, about how language wasn't about sounding impressive, but about making someone feel understood. The room was silent, not skeptical, present. Afterwards, people lined up to shake his hand, to thank him, to ask questions. Daniel answered patiently, but his thoughts were already drifting home. That evening, he and Emily sat on the couch, sharing popcorn and watching a movie with subtitles. Emily glanced at the screen. "What language is that?" "Portuguese," Daniel said. She grinned. "Teach me?" "Anytime." Daniel leaned back, feeling something settle into place. The world hadn't changed overnight. People still judged, still laughed too quickly, still underestimated quiet men in wrinkled jackets. But now Daniel knew something they didn't. His voice mattered, and he was done letting anyone else decide when it could be heard.
The attention didn't stop after the symposium. Daniel tried to pretend it would, told himself it was a temporary wave that would pass if he didn't encourage it. But emails kept coming. Invitations, requests. Some were thoughtful, others felt hollow, like people trying to collect a story instead of understand a person. Daniel learned quickly how to tell the difference. He chose carefully. He said yes to projects that aligned with his values, no to ones that felt performative. He turned down an offer to appear on a morning show because Emily had a spelling test that day and wanted him to quiz her. That choice felt easy. It always had. One evening, as Daniel walked Emily home from the library, they passed a small cafe with a handwritten sign in the window. Language Exchange Night. Emily tugged his sleeve. "Can we go?" Daniel hesitated. Crowds still made him uneasy. Being seen still felt strange. But he nodded. "Sure." Inside, the cafe buzzed softly. People sat in pairs, some nervous, some animated, switching languages mid-sentence. Daniel ordered hot chocolate for Emily and tea for himself. They found a corner table. Within minutes, a young woman approached, smiling. "Is this seat taken?" She introduced herself as Maya, a graduate student studying linguistics. Curious, kind. She spoke with warmth, not awe. When she asked Daniel how many languages he spoke, he shrugged. "Enough." Emily laughed. "He speaks a lot." Maya smiled at Emily. "That must be amazing." "It's normal," Emily said seriously. "He just listens a lot." Something in Maya's expression softened. She understood. Not the spectacle, the substance. Over the next few weeks, they ran into Maya again, at the cafe, at the library, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not. She never asked Daniel to perform, never tested him. She talked about books, about her research, about her own upbringing with immigrant parents. She listened when he spoke about Emily, about foster care, about learning to survive by paying attention. Daniel felt something unfamiliar but welcome: ease. One night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing a contract for a long-term role with an international organization. It meant stability, benefits, travel sometimes. He stared at the screen, thinking about logistics, about school schedules, about Emily's life. Then he closed the laptop. He walked into Emily's room and watched her sleep, her face relaxed, safe. He realized something important. Success wasn't loud. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about choosing what mattered again and again, even when no one was watching. The next morning, Daniel declined the role. He accepted a different one instead. Remote, flexible, less impressive on paper, perfect for their life. At school pickup that afternoon, another parent approached him. "You're the guy from the news, right?" Daniel smiled politely. "Maybe." The woman nodded. "My son struggles with reading, different language at home. Teachers don't always get it. Would you mind?" Daniel knelt to the son's level and spoke gently, switching languages until the boy's eyes lit up. The moment was small. It mattered. That night, as Daniel tucked Emily into bed, she asked, "Do people still think you're lying?" Daniel paused. "Some probably do." Emily considered this. "That's okay," she said. "They'll learn. Or they won't." Daniel smiled. "You're wise." She yawned. "I learned from you." After she fell asleep, Daniel sat by the window, city lights blinking softly. He thought about the judge's laugh, how it had stung, how it had also set something in motion. He realized he was grateful, not for the humiliation, but for the clarity that followed, for the reminder that his voice didn't need permission. The world would keep testing people like him, quiet people, single parents, those who didn't look impressive. Daniel knew that now, and he knew something else too. He would keep speaking, not to prove anything, but to make space for others who'd been told they were lying when they were simply telling the truth. The first time Daniel truly felt the weight of what had changed came on a Tuesday afternoon, the most ordinary kind of day. He was standing in line at a grocery store, Emily beside him, counting apples in the cart because that was her new favorite game, when the man behind him cleared his throat. "You're him, right?" the man said. Not hostile, not friendly, curious. Daniel turned slowly. He had learned not to rush these moments. "I might be," he said. The man nodded, studying him like a puzzle. Courtroom, languages. Daniel waited. "My wife's from Guatemala. My kid mixes Spanish and English all the time. Teachers think he's behind. He's not. He just thinks in two directions." He hesitated, then added, "Thanks for saying what you said." Daniel felt something settle in his chest. "He's not behind," he said gently. "He's building more than one road at the same time." The man smiled, relief written all over his face, and walked away without asking for anything else. That was when Daniel understood that the story wasn't about him anymore. It had moved on. It had become a mirror for other people. That night, after Emily was asleep, Daniel sat alone in the living room, lights off, the city humming outside. He replayed the judge's laugh in his mind, not with anger, with distance. It no longer hurt the way it once did. It felt small now, almost irrelevant. What mattered was what came after, the listening, the space that opened when someone finally spoke and wasn't silenced. A week later, Daniel received a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a call, a letter, handwritten. The envelope was plain, the handwriting careful. Inside, a judge from another county wrote about a case involving a refugee mother accused of misrepresenting her qualifications. The woman spoke 4 languages fluently, but none perfectly. The court had questioned her credibility. The judge admitted, quietly, that before seeing Daniel's case circulate among legal circles, he might have ruled differently. "I listened longer," the letter said, "and because I did, I heard her." Daniel folded the letter slowly. He didn't frame it, he didn't show it to anyone. He placed it in a drawer with Emily's school drawings and the old documents from foster care. Proof of survival, proof of progress. Life didn't suddenly become easy. Bills still came, Emily still had bad days at school, Daniel still woke up some mornings with a tightness in his chest he couldn't name. Trauma didn't disappear just because the world applauded you once, but something fundamental had shifted. He no longer felt invisible. One evening, Maya came over for dinner. Nothing fancy, pasta, salad, store-bought bread. Emily insisted on setting the table herself. She placed the forks crooked, proud of her work. Maya noticed everything. She always did. "You have a good rhythm here," Maya said softly when Emily went to brush her teeth. "It's calm." It had to be. Chaos wasn't an option. Maya studied him. "You know, most people would have chased the attention, the interviews, the offers." I shrugged. "I already chased survival once. I don't want to chase anything else." She smiled. "That's rare." He looked at her. "It shouldn't be." Later that night, after Maya left, Daniel lay awake thinking about the word rare. He'd been called that before. Rare talent, rare case, rare background. He hated it. It made people sound like exceptions instead of evidence. He believed there were thousands of people like him, quiet, capable, carrying entire worlds inside them without anyone noticing. They just hadn't been asked the right questions yet. The real test came months later. Daniel was called to testify in a civil case involving an international contract dispute, not as a defendant, as an expert witness. The courtroom was larger this time, the judge younger, the lawyers sharper. Cameras weren't allowed, but the tension felt familiar. As Daniel took the stand, he felt Emily's absence like a weight. She was at school. I hope she was having a good day. I hope she was laughing at recess. I hope she never felt the way he had felt as a child, sitting in rooms where adults decided who you were allowed to be. The opposing attorney smiled politely. "Mr. Mercer, do you expect this court to believe that your linguistic abilities are self-taught?" Daniel met his eyes, calm, steady. "I expect this court to listen." The room quieted. He didn't perform. He didn't list languages. He explained process, how the brain adapts, how necessity creates pathways, how listening precedes speaking. He spoke like a teacher, not a witness trying to impress. When he stepped down hours later, the judge thanked him, not formally, personally. That afternoon, Daniel picked Emily early. They went for ice cream, even though it wasn't Friday. She talked about a girl at school who spoke differently, who got teased. "What should I do?" Emily asked. Daniel knelt in front of her. "Listen first," he said, "then stand next to her." Emily nodded seriously. "Okay." That night, as Daniel tucked her in, she asked, "Daddy, when the judge laughed, were you scared?" Daniel considered the question. "I was," he admitted, "but not because he laughed, because I knew I was about to speak, and speaking changes things." Emily yawned. "I'm glad you did." "So am I," he said. After she fell asleep, Daniel stood in the doorway for a long moment. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who survived by disappearing. He was still there, somewhere inside him, but now he stood beside another version, one who understood that silence was a choice, and sometimes so was breaking it. The judge had laughed, Daniel had spoken, and the world, slowly, was learning how to listen.
Daniel didn't notice the shift all at once. It happened quietly, the way most real changes do. One conversation here, one decision there, a steady accumulation of moments that, taken alone, seemed small, but together rewrote the shape of his life. At Emily's school, teachers started asking different questions, not just about grades, but about how kids thought, how they processed information, how language at home shaped confidence in class. Daniel was invited to sit in on a meeting, not as an expert, but as a parent. That mattered to him. Expertise could be dismissed. Lived experience was harder to ignore. One teacher pulled him aside after a session. "I used to think quiet kids were disengaged," she admitted. "Now I'm realizing they're often just observing." Daniel smiled. "Some of us learn by watching the whole room first." Emily noticed the change too. She came home one day and announced that a boy in her class who used to get teased had been asked to help teach everyone a few words in his home language. "He was smiling the whole time," she said, "like he finally got picked." Daniel felt that familiar tightness in his chest again, the good kind, the kind that reminded him why he kept showing up. Maya became a steady presence, not dramatic, not rushed. She fit into their life the way light fills a room when you open a curtain, slowly, naturally, without forcing anything. She helped Emily with a science project, asked thoughtful questions, never tried to replace anyone. Daniel appreciated that more than she probably knew. One evening, while washing dishes together, Maya asked him something he hadn't expected. "Do you ever wish you'd spoken sooner?" Daniel considered it, hands moving through warm water. "Sometimes, but I also know I wasn't ready. Speaking before you know who you are just makes noise." She nodded. "And now? Now I know what I'm protecting." Life tested that resolve again sooner than he thought. An old acquaintance from one of his foster homes reached out. The man worked for a private firm that specialized in high-profile legal consulting. They wanted Daniel, not for his language skills alone, but for his story. "People listen to you," the man said. "You could make serious money." Daniel thanked him and declined. The man sounded confused. "You don't want influence?" Daniel answered honestly, "I don't want to become someone my daughter can't recognize." That night, he told Emily about the offer in simple terms. She listened carefully, legs tucked under her on the couch. "Would it make you happy?" she asked. "No," Daniel said without hesitation. "Then you made the right choice," she said, like it was obvious. Daniel laughed softly. "When did you get so wise?" She shrugged. "I watch you." That might have been the moment he understood the full weight of being seen, not by judges or crowds, but by the one person who mattered most. Months passed, seasons changed. The story that once felt like a turning point settled into something steadier. Daniel didn't stop speaking up, but he learned when silence served better. He helped where he could. He stepped back when it wasn't his place. He learned that dignity wasn't about always being heard. It was about knowing when your voice could help someone else be heard instead. The judge from that first courtroom never contacted him again. Daniel didn't need him to. Closure didn't require apologies. It required forward motion. One afternoon, Emily came home upset. A substitute teacher had corrected her pronunciation during roll call, laughing it off. "You say it funny," the teacher had said. Emily hadn't known what to say. Daniel sat with her on the edge of the bed. "Did it make you feel small?" he asked. Emily nodded. He took a breath. "Next time you can say, 'That's how my family says it.' You don't owe anyone an explanation beyond that." "What if they laugh?" "Then you stay calm. Laughing doesn't mean they're right. It just means they don't know yet." Emily practiced the words out loud, steady, clear. Daniel felt a familiar pride, not loud, grounded. That weekend, Daniel stood at the edge of a community center gym watching a group of kids practice for a multilingual storytelling event. Emily was one of them. She'd volunteered to read a short passage in English, then repeat a few lines in another language she was learning. She stumbled once, corrected herself, kept going. Daniel didn't clap the loudest. He didn't need to. He stood there, hands in his pockets, feeling something close to peace. After the event, another parent approached him. "Your daughter has confidence," the woman said. "Where did she get that?" Daniel looked across the room at Emily, laughing with new friends. He said, "She earned it, and she keeps earning it." That night, as he lay awake, Daniel thought again about that first laugh, the judge's disbelief, the way the room had leaned away from him. He realized something surprising. If it happened again tomorrow, it wouldn't break him. He had learned that truth didn't need permission, that dignity wasn't granted by authority. that the quiet man in the wrinkled jacket had always been enough. He just needed to believe it himself. And maybe, just maybe, the world was starting to catch up.
Daniel used to think moments of resolution would feel louder, like a door slamming shut, like applause. Instead, the biggest ones arrived quietly, almost shyly, and waited for him to notice them. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening. Emily was doing homework at the kitchen table, her pencil tapping lightly as she sounded out a paragraph. Daniel was nearby, answering emails on his laptop, the soft hum of rain filling the room. Everything felt ordinary, safe. That was when his phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He considered ignoring it, then answered. "Mr. Mercer?" a familiar voice said, older, measured. "This is Judge Harold Whitman." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, not from fear, from recognition. "Yes," Daniel said, calmly. "I'm calling because I've been asked to sit on a judicial education panel. Implicit bias, language assumptions, communication barriers in courtrooms." He cleared his throat. "Your case has come up more times than I'd like to admit." Daniel stayed silent. He had learned the power of that. "I laughed," the judge said. The word landed heavy, even now. "I shouldn't have. I didn't understand what I was hearing, and instead of asking questions, I dismissed you." Another pause. "I'm calling to say that was wrong." Daniel listened, really listened, not for excuses, for truth. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," the judge added. "I don't think that's mine to request, but I would like to ask if you'd consider speaking to the panel, not as a novelty, as a perspective we clearly lack." Daniel glanced at Emily, who was now chewing the end of her pencil, completely unaware of the weight in the room. "I'll think about it," Daniel said. "That's all I ask," the judge replied. "Thank you for answering." When the call ended, Daniel sat still for a long moment. The rain hadn't stopped. Emily looked up. "Who was that?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Someone learning." She nodded, accepting that answer without needing more. That night, Daniel didn't sleep much, not because he was anxious, but because he was thinking carefully about power, about responsibility, about how easily a moment like that could turn into another stage, another spotlight he didn't want. But he also thought about the refugee mother from the letter, about the boy in the grocery store, about Emily and her classmates. In the morning, he emailed the judge back. He agreed, on one condition: no press, no recordings, no spectacle, just conversation. The panel took place 2 months later in a modest conference room. No robes, no gavels, just judges, clerks, attorneys, and a quiet man in a simple jacket. Daniel didn't tell a dramatic story. He talked about misunderstanding, about how laughter shuts doors faster than anger ever could, about how listening isn't passive, it's an action. When he finished, no one clapped. They sat there, thinking. Daniel preferred that. Afterward, a young clerk approached him, eyes bright. "I've been bilingual my whole life," she said. "I always felt like I had to choose which version of myself was professional." She paused. "I don't think I do anymore." Daniel nodded. "You never did." Life kept moving. Emily grew taller, asked harder questions, learned to push back gently but firmly when someone underestimated her. Maya became family in all the ways that mattered, not by declaration, by presence. One night, as they sat on the fire escape watching the city lights, Maya asked Daniel, "Do you ever miss being invisible?" Daniel considered it. Sometimes, he admitted, it was simpler, but it was also lonelier. She rested her head on his shoulder. "You're still quiet." He smiled. "I just don't disappear anymore." The final test came unexpectedly. Emily was selected to represent her school in a citywide student council forum. She was nervous, excited, terrified. Daniel watched her practice her short speech, correcting herself, starting again. "What if they laugh?" she asked, echoing a question from long ago.
Daniel knelt in front of her. Then you breathe, you speak anyway, and you remember that laughter doesn't decide truth. On the day of the forum, Daniel sat in the audience, hands folded, heart pounding harder than it ever had in any courtroom. Emily stepped up to the microphone. She took a breath. She spoke clearly, confidently, about inclusion, about listening, about how being different didn't make you wrong. No one laughed. They listened. On the walk home, Emily slipped her hand into Daniel's. "I wasn't scared," she said, surprised by it herself. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "That's how you know you're ready." That night, after Emily fell asleep, Daniel stood by the window again. Same city, same lights, different man. He thought about the judge's laugh, now distant. He thought about the words that followed, about how speaking hadn't made him powerful, but it had made him present, and presence, he'd learned, was everything. He didn't need the world to stop laughing. He just needed it to start listening. And this time, it was.
Daniel thought the call with Judge Whitman would be the end of it, a closing of a loop, a quiet acknowledgement that what happened in that courtroom had mattered. But life had a way of circling back, not to repeat pain, but to test whether you'd actually learned from it. The test came on a Sunday morning. Emily was still asleep, sprawled across her bed in a way that suggested dreams without fear. Daniel moved quietly through the apartment, making coffee, straightening the small space they'd made their own. The knock on the door startled him. It was early, too early for casual visitors. When he opened it, a woman stood there holding a leather folder, rain dampening the shoulders of her coat. She looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Mercer?" she asked. "Yes." "My name is Rachel Collins. I'm a public defender." Daniel nodded slowly. "Okay." She took a breath. "I have a client, single mother, immigrant, accused of falsifying documents. The prosecution believes she exaggerated her language skills. The judge is skeptical." Daniel understood immediately. Not the details, the shape of it. "She says you're the reason she's still fighting," Rachel continued. "Your case, your testimony. She saw it online. She believes if someone like you could speak and be heard, maybe she could too." Daniel stepped aside, letting her in. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Emily did her homework, where decisions were made quietly and carefully. Rachel spread out papers. "Her name is Ana Morales. She speaks 5 languages, none perfectly by academic standards, enough to work, enough to survive, not enough, apparently, to be believed." Daniel leaned back, hands folded. He felt that familiar pull, not obligation, recognition. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Rachel hesitated. "I need you to sit in the courtroom. Just be there. The judge respects precedent. Seeing you might remind him." Daniel looked toward Emily's room. He always did that first. "When?" "Tomorrow." He exhaled slowly. "I'll come." The courtroom was smaller than the first, older, wood worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Daniel sat in the back, unnoticed at first. He preferred it that way. Ana sat at the defense table, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on her hands. She looked exhausted, scared, familiar. The prosecutor spoke confidently, listing inconsistencies, mispronunciations, moments where Ana had paused too long before answering. Daniel listened, jaw tight. He'd heard this music before. When the judge entered, Daniel felt a shift. The man was different from Whitman, younger, sharper. But when his eyes scanned the room and landed on Daniel, something flickered. Recognition, uncertainty. Ana testified. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She spoke about work, about children, about learning languages in kitchens, on buses, in borrowed rooms. She stumbled once, corrected herself, kept going. The prosecutor smirked. The judge leaned forward.
"Ms. Morales," he said, "you claim fluency, yet you hesitate, you mix structures. How can this court trust that?" Anna swallowed. She looked toward Rachel, then unexpectedly toward Daniel. He didn't nod, he didn't smile, he simply met her gaze and stayed there. Anna took a breath. "Because I understand," she said softly, "and because people understand me. Fluency is not perfection, it is connection." The room went still. The judge sat back, his eyes drifted again to Daniel, then back to Anna. "Mr. Mercer," the judge said suddenly. Daniel stood. "You were present in a similar case. Would you care to approach?" Rachel startled. The prosecutor frowned. Daniel walked forward slowly, every step deliberate. "I'm not a witness," Daniel said calmly. "I'm aware," the judge replied, "but you are context." Daniel considered his words carefully. "I am proof," he said, "that listening longer changes outcomes." The judge nodded once. He dismissed Daniel back to his seat. An hour later, the charges were reduced. Anna wept quietly, hands covering her face. Rachel squeezed Daniel's arm as they left the courtroom. "You didn't say much," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "I didn't need to." That night, Daniel sat with Emily on the couch, telling her a softened version of the day. She listened intently. "Did you help?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "How?" "I stood where I was needed." Emily smiled. "That's your thing." Later, after she fell asleep, Daniel sat alone again. Same window, same lights, but now there was a deeper stillness inside him. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of certainty. He finally understood something that had taken him a lifetime to learn. His power was never in the languages he spoke. It was in the spaces he refused to leave empty, the moments he chose to stay present when others turned away. The judge had laughed once. Now, judges listened. And Daniel knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning.
Daniel didn't talk about Anna Morales after that. Not publicly, not privately either. He believed stories belonged to the people who lived them, not the ones who happened to stand nearby. What mattered to him was that she went home to her children that night. What mattered was that she slept without fear, even if only a little. But something else followed him home from that courtroom, a feeling he couldn't shake. It wasn't pride, it wasn't satisfaction, it was responsibility. He felt it the next morning when he walked Emily to school and noticed how many parents looked exhausted, stretched thin, holding their lives together with routine and hope. He felt it when he overheard a teacher gently correcting a child's accent, meaning well, but missing the point. He felt it when a neighbor asked him to help translate a letter from the housing office because no one else had time. Daniel realized he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Once you see how silence harms people, staying silent becomes a choice, and choices, once recognized, carry weight. The invitation came quietly, an email from a community legal center, not a big institution, no prestige, just a group of overworked attorneys trying to keep people from being swallowed by systems that moved too fast and listened too little. They wanted Daniel to help design a language access program, not as a spokesperson, as a collaborator. He said yes without hesitation. The work was slow, meetings in borrowed rooms, long conversations about how courts worked versus how people actually lived. Daniel spent hours listening to stories that sounded painfully familiar. People judged not by what they meant, but by how they sounded, not by what they knew, but by how quickly they spoke. He didn't lecture, he asked questions. What do you assume when someone pauses? What do you hear when someone mixes grammar? What do you miss when you rush to decide? Some people pushed back. Change always made people uncomfortable.
but others leaned in, especially those who had quietly felt the same discomfort and never had words for it. At home, Emily noticed he was tired than usual. "You're helping a lot of people," she said one night, brushing her teeth. "I'm trying," Daniel replied. She thought about that. "Don't forget to help yourself, too." He smiled. "Deal." Maya watched all of this with a careful eye. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, she said, "You're building something." Daniel paused. "I don't know what it is yet." "You don't have to," she said. "Just don't disappear into it." That mattered to him more than she knew. The real challenge came when the work started to succeed. Funding offers appeared, advisory boards, invitations to scale the program statewide. With success came attention, and with attention came pressure. People wanted Daniel to represent things, to become a symbol. He felt the familiar pull toward being useful in ways that didn't feel right. One afternoon, during a meeting, a well-dressed consultant said, "Your story is compelling if we position it correctly." Daniel interrupted gently, "It's not a story, it's a pattern." The room quieted. "I'm not interested in being positioned. I'm interested in changing how decisions are made when no one thinks they're being watched." That clarity cost him opportunities. He lost a sponsor that day. He didn't lose sleep over it. The shift showed up most clearly in Emily. She came home one afternoon frustrated. A classmate had mocked the way her friend spoke. Emily had stepped in, not loudly, not angrily. She'd said, "She speaks more than one language. What do you do?" The teacher had overheard. Instead of scolding, she had paused, then turned the moment into a discussion. Emily told the story like it was no big deal. Daniel knew better. He knew exactly how big it was. That night, as he tucked Emily in, she asked, "Do you think people can change?" Daniel thought about judges, about prosecutors, about teachers, about himself. "Yes," he said, "but only if they're willing to feel uncomfortable first." Emily nodded, satisfied, and drifted off. Months later, Daniel stood in the back of a courthouse hallway, watching a young man argue his own case with a confidence that surprised everyone in the room. The man spoke slowly, carefully, in accented English that carried conviction. The judge listened. Daniel felt something close to awe, not because the system was suddenly perfect, it wasn't, but because moments like this were impossible once. After the hearing, the young man approached Daniel. "They said you helped build this program." Daniel shook his head. "A lot of people did." "But you started it," the man insisted. Daniel met his eyes. "No, I just refused to stay quiet when it mattered." That night, Daniel stood by the window again, same place, same city. He realized he'd stopped measuring his life by outcomes. He measured it by alignment now, by whether his choices matched his values, by whether Emily saw consistency between his words and actions. The judge's laugh felt like a lifetime ago. In its place was something stronger, a steady voice, a presence that didn't need permission, a man who understood that dignity wasn't something you defended once, it was something you practiced daily. Daniel turned off the light and went to bed. Tomorrow there would be more work, and he would be ready.
Daniel woke before his alarm the next morning, the way he often did now. Not from worry, from awareness. The kind that came when your life finally felt aligned enough that your mind stayed alert even at rest. He made coffee quietly and stood by the window, watching the city stretch awake. Delivery trucks, early buses, lights clicking on one by one. Somewhere in all of that were people heading into rooms where their words would be judged before their meaning. Daniel knew those rooms well. Emily shuffled in, hair wild, eyes half closed. "You're up early again," she said. "Couldn't sleep," Daniel replied. She yawned. "Good or bad?" "Good," he said after a moment. "Just thinking." She nodded, satisfied, and climbed onto the chair to eat her cereal. Silence settled between them.
easy and familiar. Later that day, Daniel received an email that made him sit down. The state judiciary had approved a pilot program, language access training. Not mandatory, not yet, but official. His name wasn't attached publicly, but his framework was there. Listening protocols, bias interruption steps, simple changes that forced people to slow down before deciding. It wasn't a victory, it was an opening. Daniel forwarded the email to the legal center team, then closed his laptop. He knew better than to celebrate too early. Systems resisted change. They bent, then snapped back. Progress wasn't a straight line, it was maintenance. That afternoon, he met Maya at the cafe where they'd first talked months earlier. Same corner table, same hum of voices, different weight between them. "They approved it," Daniel told her. She smiled. "You don't look surprised." "I'm not," Daniel said. "I just know what comes next." She studied him. "You're allowed to feel proud, you know." He thought about that. "I am. I just don't want pride to turn into distance." She reached across the table, resting her hand near his, not touching, just present. "It won't," she said. "You're too grounded for that." Daniel hoped she was right. The test came faster than expected. A news outlet reached out, not a tabloid, a serious publication. They wanted to run a feature, not sensational, thoughtful, anonymous if he preferred, focused on the system, not the man. Daniel wrestled with it for days. Visibility could help. It could also distort. He talked it through with Maya, with Rachel, with Emily in a way that didn't burden her. "What happens if you say no?" Emily asked. "Then fewer people hear about it," Daniel replied. "And if you say yes?" "Then more people hear," he said. "But some might listen for the wrong reasons." Emily frowned. "You can't control why people listen." Daniel smiled slowly. "You're right." He agreed to the interview, on his terms. No photos, no name, just a voice explaining why slowing down mattered. When the piece came out, reactions were mixed. Some praised it, some mocked it. Comments argued, debated, missed the point entirely. Daniel didn't read them. What he did read were the messages that came quietly. A court clerk who said she'd started waiting an extra 10 seconds before interrupting. A public defender who said a judge had stopped himself mid-sentence and asked a defendant to repeat himself instead of dismissing him. Small shifts, real ones. One evening, Daniel found Emily sitting on the floor, sorting through old drawings. "I'm making a timeline," Emily said. "Of what?" Daniel asked. "Us," she replied, "before and after." He sat beside her. The drawings were simple, stick figures, 2 of them, always holding hands. In earlier ones, they were small. In later ones, taller, braver. "Where do you think the change happened?" Daniel asked. Emily pointed to a picture of a man standing alone in a room full of people. "Here," she said. Daniel swallowed. "Why there?" "Because that's when you didn't back down, even though everyone thought you were wrong." Daniel hugged her gently. "I wasn't brave. I was tired of being quiet." Emily leaned into him. "Sometimes that's the same thing." Weeks later, Daniel received one last message from Judge Whitman. Short, simple. "They're listening more now. Not enough, but more." Daniel stared at the words, then closed the email. That night, he stood by the window again. Same city, same lights. But now, when he thought of that laugh, it didn't echo. It faded. He understood something fully now. Speaking up hadn't changed who he was. It had revealed who he'd always been. A man who listened deeply, who chose presence over performance, who knew that words weren't powerful because of how many you knew, but because of when you used them. Daniel turned away from the window and headed to bed. Tomorrow would bring new rooms, new assumptions, new moments that demanded choice. And when they came, he wouldn't disappear. He would speak.
Daniel didn't realize the work had reshaped him until one quiet evening when nothing at all was happening. No meetings, no emails, no crises waiting at the door. Just him, Emily, and the low hum of the apartment settling into night. Emily was on the floor, building something with mismatched blocks. She worked carefully, stacking and adjusting, knocking things over and starting again without frustration. Daniel watched her from the couch, struck by how natural resilience looked when it wasn't named or praised. It just existed. "Dad," she said suddenly, not looking up, "do you ever get tired of explaining things?" Daniel thought about it. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but explaining means someone's listening." She nodded, like that made sense. "I think people should listen more before they talk." Daniel smiled. "That's a very grown-up thought." She shrugged. "I learned it from you." Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Daniel opened his laptop and reread an email he'd been avoiding. It was from an international organization he respected deeply. They wanted him to consult on language access for humanitarian operations overseas, short-term, focused, ethical, the kind of work that once would have felt impossible with a child to raise alone. He closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. A year ago, the idea would have terrified him. Now it felt manageable, not because the world had become easier, but because he trusted himself more. The next morning, he talked to Emily about it over breakfast. He explained in simple terms, helping people far away, talking on video calls, sometimes working odd hours. "Would you be gone?" she asked. "No," Daniel said. "I'd still be here, just sometimes busy." Emily considered this. "Can I help too?" He laughed softly. "How?" "I can remind you to eat and sleep," she said seriously. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Deal." The work began slowly. Late-night calls with people in different time zones, conversations that felt familiar in a way that surprised him. Refugee coordinators, field doctors, teachers working out of borrowed buildings, people who understood that language was never just about words. Daniel found himself listening more than speaking. It was still his strength. One evening, after a particularly heavy call, he stepped out onto the fire escape for air. The city stretched below him, indifferent and alive. He thought about the boy he once been, moving from house to house, learning to read rooms before he ever read books. That skill had kept him safe then. Now it was doing something else. It was opening doors. Maya joined him quietly, handing him a mug of tea. She didn't ask questions right away. She knew better. "Do you feel like you're carrying too much?" she asked eventually. Daniel considered it. "No," he said, "but I feel like I'm choosing more carefully." She nodded. "That's not the same thing." Emily appeared behind them, wrapped in a blanket. "I couldn't sleep," she said. Daniel opened his arms and she stepped into them without hesitation. The three of them stood there together, city lights blinking below, the night cool and steady. "I think," Emily said sleepily, "that you don't need to fix everything, just the parts you touch." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "That might be the smartest thing anyone's ever said to me." As Emily drifted back to sleep on the couch, Daniel felt something settle deep inside him. The urgency that once drove him had softened into purpose. He no longer felt pulled in 100 directions. He felt rooted. The judge's laugh had started something, but it no longer defined the story. It was just the inciting moment, the spark that revealed what was already there. Daniel had found his voice, yes, but more importantly, he'd found his place. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Daniel didn't think of himself as someone who had arrived anywhere. Arrival suggested an endpoint, and life had taught him that there were very few true endings. What he felt instead was steadiness, like his feet finally knew the ground they were standing on. The international consulting work settled into a rhythm. Some weeks were quiet, others were intense, filled with stories that stayed with him long after the calls ended. He learned when to shut the laptop and sit with the weight of what he'd heard.
He learned when to speak, and when silence was the kinder response. Emily adapted easily. She always had. She did homework at the kitchen table while Daniel worked nearby, both of them existing in the same space without needing to fill it with noise. Sometimes she asked questions about the places he worked with, about kids her age who lived far away. Daniel answered honestly but carefully. He never wanted the world to feel frightening to her, only real. At school, Emily's teacher asked Daniel if he would be willing to talk to the class during International Week. Nothing formal, just a conversation about languages and listening. Daniel hesitated, then agreed. When the day came, he stood in front of 20 curious faces, none of them impressed by titles or backstories. They wanted stories. He told them about learning words in kitchens and playgrounds, about how listening came before speaking, about how every language carried feelings as much as meaning. One child raised her hand. "Is it bad to talk different?" Daniel smiled. "It's only bad if people stop listening because of it." Emily watched him from her seat, eyes bright. Afterward, as they walked home, she said, "You didn't even tell them the cool parts." Daniel laughed. "Which parts?" "The courtroom," she said. "The judge, the languages." He shook his head. "Those aren't the cool parts. The cool part is knowing when to speak." Emily considered this. "I think the cool part is that you stayed calm." That night, Daniel lay awake thinking about that word again. Calm. It had taken him years to understand that calm wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision not to let fear drive. The call came a few weeks later, unexpected but not surprising. A legal advocacy group wanted him on their board, not as a symbol, as a voice. Someone who would question assumptions, slow conversations down, ask uncomfortable questions. Daniel didn't answer right away. He talked it through with Maya, who reminded him gently that saying yes didn't mean losing himself. He talked it through with Emily, who asked if it meant fewer movie nights. "No," Daniel said, "that part doesn't change." "Then you should do it," she said simply. He accepted. Board meetings were different from courtrooms, less overt power, more subtle influence. Daniel learned to read the room the same way he always had. Who spoke first? Who interrupted? Who stayed quiet because they'd learned it was safer that way? He made space. He redirected conversations. He asked, "Who's missing from this decision?" Not everyone appreciated it. That was fine. One afternoon, during a heated discussion about budget priorities, someone said, "We can't slow everything down for nuance." Daniel responded calmly, "Nuance is what keeps us from hurting people we never intended to." The room fell quiet. Then the conversation shifted. At home, life remained reassuringly ordinary. Laundry piled up, dishes waited. Emily complained about math homework. Daniel burned the toast one morning and laughed at herself. Daniel found comfort in these small imperfections. They reminded him that life wasn't meant to be polished, it was meant to be lived. The anniversary of the courtroom day came without fanfare. Daniel didn't mark it intentionally. He only realized when an old calendar reminder surfaced on his phone. He stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. That chapter had done its work. Later that evening, as he walked Emily to bed, she asked, "Do you think that judge remembers you?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Probably." "What do you think he remembers most?" Daniel thought about it. "I hope he remembers the pause, the moment he stopped laughing." Emily nodded. "Pauses are important." "Yes," Daniel agreed, "they are." When the lights were out and the apartment quiet, Daniel sat alone one last time by the window. The city hadn't changed. The world was still loud, still rushed, still quick to judge, but Daniel no longer felt at its mercy. He understood now that dignity wasn't something you demanded or defended in a single dramatic moment. It was something you carried quietly into every room. It was choosing to stay present, choosing to listen, choosing to speak when it mattered, even if your voice shook. The judge had laughed once. Daniel had spoken, and in the space that followed, a life had grown.
Daniel woke up on the anniversary morning without realizing what day it was. The habit of measuring time by milestones had faded. Now he measured it by mornings that felt steady, by nights that ended without regret. Emily was already awake.
sitting cross-legged on the floor with her backpack open, reorganizing it for the third time. "I can't find my blue notebook," she said. Daniel smiled. "Check the freezer." She groaned. That was one time. She found the notebook under the couch and laughed at herself. Daniel watched her, struck by how much confidence lived in the way she moved now. Not loud, not showy, just certain that she belonged wherever she stood. After walking her to school, Daniel took a longer route home. He did that sometimes now, not to avoid anything, just to notice. The bakery on the corner opening its doors, the man who sold flowers setting up his buckets, the woman at the bus stop practicing English quietly under her breath. Daniel slowed, listening as she repeated the same sentence again and again, each time a little steadier. At home, his inbox waited. There were messages from the legal center, from the advocacy board, from international partners in different time zones. Daniel read them carefully, responding where needed, closing the rest. He had learned the difference between urgency and importance. It had taken most of his life. Around noon, his phone rang. Rachel Collins. He answered. "I wanted you to hear this from me," she said. "Anna Morales got her work permit renewed, full term." Daniel closed his eyes. "That's good. She asked me to thank you." "You can tell her she did the work. I just stayed in the room." Rachel laughed softly. "You always say that." "Because it's true." After the call, Daniel sat quietly for a while, not reflecting, not planning, just sitting. He realized that the restlessness he'd carried for years was gone, not replaced by certainty, but by trust. Trust in himself, in the choices he made when no one was watching. That afternoon, Maya came by with groceries and news. She'd been offered a teaching position, part-time, close to home. She tried to sound casual, but Daniel could hear the hope under it. "That's great," he said. "Do you want it?" She nodded. "I think I do." They talked through logistics the way they always did, thoughtfully, without drama. Emily burst in halfway through, excited about a group project at school. She barely noticed the adult conversation happening around her. That was a good sign. Dinner that night was loud. Emily told stories, Maya laughed. Daniel burnt the rice and pretended it was intentional. Life didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like continuity. Later, after Emily was asleep, Daniel stepped onto the fire escape alone. The air was cool, the city steady. He thought about the first time he'd stood in a courtroom and felt the room tilt against him, how quickly people decided what was possible based on what they could see. He understood now that speaking 15 languages was never the point. It was just the detail people latched onto. The real shift had happened when he refused to shrink, when he stayed present instead of disappearing, when he trusted that his voice, calm and unremarkable as it was, deserved space. A message buzzed on his phone, an unknown number. Daniel hesitated, then opened it. It was a short note from a law student. "I was in the gallery the day you spoke. I didn't think someone like me belonged in that world. I stayed because of you. Thank you." Daniel stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he typed a reply. Simple, honest. "You always belonged. Don't let anyone rush you out of the room." He put the phone down and leaned against the railing, feeling the quiet settle again. Inside, Emily shifted in her sleep. Maya moved softly in the kitchen. Ordinary sounds, grounding sounds. Daniel smiled to himself. The judge had laughed once. That laughter had echoed longer than it deserved to, but it had also cracked something open, not just in a courtroom, but in a life that had learned to survive by staying silent. Daniel had learned something better. Silence could be chosen. so could speaking. And sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was simply remain where they were, steady and unafraid, until the world adjusted its listening.
Daniel didn't answer messages right away anymore. That was another change he'd noticed. He used to respond quickly, afraid that silence might be mistaken for indifference or incompetence. Now he understood that pausing was not the same as disappearing. It was a way of choosing. The next morning, as he walked Emily to school, she told him about a new student who joined her class. "He doesn't talk much," she said. "Some kids think he's weird." Daniel slowed his steps. "What do you think?" "I think he's just watching," she replied. "Like you." Daniel smiled. "That's a good instinct." At pickup that afternoon, Emily introduced him to the boy. His name was Amir. He stood half a step behind Emily, shoulders tight, eyes alert. Daniel greeted him gently, using a few words in a language Amir recognized. The boy's eyes widened, then softened. He didn't speak, but he nodded. On the walk home, Emily chattered as usual, but Daniel noticed Amir walking a little closer now, the tension in his shoulders easing. It was a small thing. It mattered. That evening, Daniel received a message from the Community Legal Center. A local court wanted to adopt their language access framework permanently, not as a pilot, as policy. Daniel reread the email twice, then once more slowly. He felt no rush of triumph, just a quiet sense of rightness. He forwarded the message to the team with a simple note: "This belongs to everyone who stayed patient." Maya found him later, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular. "Good news?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said, "but the kind that asks for more care, not celebration." She nodded. "Those are the hardest kinds." Maya burst in moments later, holding a crumpled paper. "We're supposed to write about someone who helped us," she announced. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And?" "And I picked you," she said, like it was obvious. He felt his throat tighten. "I don't have to," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "I want to." Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Daniel read her draft. It wasn't polished. It didn't mention courtrooms or judges. It talked about listening, about staying calm, about not leaving when things felt uncomfortable. It ended with a simple sentence: "My dad helps people by staying." Daniel sat with that for a long time. Days later, he found himself back in a courthouse, not as a witness, not as context, as an observer. A training session was underway. Judges and clerks sat in small groups, role-playing scenarios that forced them to slow down. Daniel watched quietly from the back. At one point, a young judge hesitated mid-sentence and said, "I think I'm assuming something here. Can we pause?" Daniel felt something shift inside him. That pause was the work. That pause was the change. After the session, the judge approached Daniel. "This feels awkward," she admitted, "but necessary." Daniel nodded. Growth usually does. On the walk home, the city felt different again. Not transformed, just slightly more breathable. That night, Daniel dreamed of his younger self, the boy who moved from house to house, learning languages without knowing why, learning silence before speech. He saw that boy standing in a room full of adults, waiting patiently. Then, in the dream, Daniel stepped beside him, not to pull him away, to stand with him. He felt a sense of completion he hadn't felt before. In the morning, Emily asked, "Are you happy?" Daniel considered the question. He didn't rush the answer. "Yes," he said, in a quiet way. She smiled. "That's my favorite kind." Daniel watched her head off to school, backpack bouncing, confident in a way that felt earned. He turned back toward home, toward the work waiting for him, toward a life that no longer felt like it was being lived in reaction. The judge had laughed once. Daniel had spoken. Now others were learning when to pause, and in those pauses, something better was taking shape.
Daniel didn't plan anything special for that day. No speeches, no meetings, no milestones marked on a calendar. It started like most mornings now, quietly, with coffee brewing and Emily humming to herself as she tied her shoes. "Dad," she said, pausing at the door, "do you remember when you had to go to court?" Daniel smiled. "I do." "Was that the day everything changed?" He thought about it for a moment. "It was the day I stopped pretending I didn't belong." Emily nodded, like that fit neatly into something she already understood. "I think that's important." They walked to school together, the air cool and clear. At the corner, Emily stopped, as she always did now, and hugged him tight. Not rushed, not distracted. Then she ran ahead, backpack bouncing, turning once to wave before disappearing inside. Daniel stood there a moment longer than usual, watching the doors close behind her. He felt no urge to follow, no fear that the world would swallow her up if he wasn't right beside her. She was ready for her own rooms now, ready to listen, ready to speak. He walked home slowly. Inside the apartment, sunlight fell across the kitchen table where so much life had happened. Homework, hard conversations, quiet victories. Daniel sat down, hands folded, and let himself be still. His phone buzzed once, a message from the legal center. The language access program had officially been written into policy. No press release, no announcement, just a line in a document that would quietly change how people were treated when they walked into a courtroom. Daniel read it, nodded once, and put the phone down. That was enough. In the afternoon, Maya came by with groceries and a familiar smile. "You look settled," she said. "I feel settled," Daniel replied. They cooked together, moving easily around each other. No urgency, no proving. When Emily came home, she launched into a story about Amir, about how he'd finally raised his hand in class and answered a question, how the teacher had waited, how no one laughed. Daniel listened, heart full, knowing exactly what that pause had cost and what it had given. That evening, as the city lights came on one by one, Daniel stood by the window one last time. He didn't replay the judge's laugh anymore. It had lost its power. What remained was the space that followed, the silence where he'd chosen not to disappear, the moment where he'd stayed. He understood now that speaking 15 languages was never the miracle. The miracle was listening long enough to be heard. The miracle was dignity practiced quietly, day after day, until it changed the shape of a life. Daniel turned off the light and went to sit with his family. Tomorrow, there would be new rooms, new assumptions, new chances to pause instead of rush, to listen instead of judge. He wouldn't meet them loudly. He wouldn't meet them afraid. He would meet them as he always had, steady and present, knowing that his voice didn't need permission. It only needed truth.